Why is the Chinese Communist Party pushing the false narrative that Hong Kong was never a colony, even though it was under British rule from 1841 to 1997, with a brief stint under Japanese occupation during World War II? Stick around and let's find out. Hong Kong media Pai Daily recently revealed academic textbooks submitted for review by the Hong Kong Education Bureau state that Hong Kong was not a former colony. Quote, "This is a patently false statement," unquote, says Hong Kong historian Hans Yung-Win-Yu. He explains that communist regimes and altering history go hand in hand. Altering textbook content is a necessary step to maintain continued suppression of the Hong Kong independence movement. Its aim is to erase Hong Kong from ever having been a British colony, irrespective of the actual history. Now, why does this matter? In 1960, the United Nations passed Resolution 1514. It states that any colony secured through armed conflict has a right to self-determination or the right to seek independence, according to the intention of the resolution to end colonialism. This UN resolution means Hong Kong is eligible to seek independence if it so desires. It wasn't until the Sino-British negotiations in the 1980s that British handed over Hong Kong sovereignty to China while retaining governance over the colony. Jung explains, quote, "The CCP is now claiming the communist regime never relinquished Hong Kong sovereignty," unquote. The historian lays out 5 key points. Point number 1, during the wave of decolonization after World War II, the UN listed colonies eligible for the path to independence under UN Resolution 1514. Hong Kong and Macau were originally included in that list of colonies. The second point, on October 25, 1971, the United Nations General Assembly voted to admit the People's Republic of China, that's mainland Communist China, and expel the Republic of China, that's Taiwan. The United States, the most significant opponent of the resolution, had argued for the Communist PRC to be admitted separately from the Republic of China. Point number 3, the CCP fabricated the technicality, Hong Kong is not a colony, to distort facts. The idea is to have the public believe the lie that Hong Kong and Macau were not technically ordinary colonies. Point number 4, by removing Hong Kong and Macau from the UN non-self-governing territories list, it doesn't erase the past that Hong Kong was in fact a colony. It does change the course of history, however, by silencing Hong Kong's future independence movement. The last point, by altering textbook content and inserting the false narrative that Hong Kong was not a colony, and then additionally implementing a prohibition against any discussion on the topic, means that the public is conditioned over time to adopt a new false history as historical fact. The British handed Hong Kong over to CCP China in 1997. A year later, the Hong Kong was not a British colony narrative was born. CCP textbook guidelines required the word colony be replaced with the word Hong Kong. Per November 1998 documents submitted to the Legislative Council by the Law Drafting Division of Hong Kong's Department of Justice. Historian Hans Yung-Win-Yu remembers this change as he was part of the machinery that carried out the new guidelines. He witnessed it as a manager of the Assessment Development Department of the Hong Kong Examinations and Assessment Authority. Quote, "Not until the 2010s, when the issue of Hong Kong independence emerged, were the 1998 textbook guidelines actually enforced." He also says that in 2018, the Bureau's textbook review team barred phrases such as "China taking back Hong Kong" and "China insists on taking back Hong Kong's sovereignty." These were flagged as inappropriate wording requiring revision, unquote. Jung warns that the situation intensified following the overnight ratification of the National Security Law June 2021, absent any form of democratic Hong Kong legislative oversight. This is when the Bureau's textbook review team made a most bizarre ruling, deeming the statement, "Hong Kong is located in the south of China," as inaccurate. Quote, "How can one dispute the fact that Hong Kong is located in the south of China? It turns out they did not disclose the reason behind this bizarre ruling to the public because the reason was so absurd. Believe it or not, the textbook review team sincerely believed that by putting Hong Kong and China together in one sentence, Hong Kongers might believe that they share equal status with mainland China. And that's why the revision "Hong Kong is located in the south of China" was deemed inaccurate, requiring publishers to revise the statement, unquote. He recalls that he had argued with the Bureau over similar semantics reviewing examination papers many times during his tenure. Soon thereafter, he was fired from his position by the authorities. Jung explains that Hong Kong has a strong legal foundation as a colony under British law, which the CCP cannot alter. Britain's Charter of the Colony of Hong, passed in 1843 after the founding of Hong Kong, laid the legal foundation for Hong Kong as a colony. In fact, the official name of Hong Kong was the Colony of Hong Kong throughout the period of British governance, referred equally throughout British academia. It doesn't help the CCP that Sun Yat-sen, the father of the pre-CCP nation of the Republic of China that lived from 1912 to 1949, is on record referring to Hong Kong as a colony. Sun said that his revolutionary ideas came from Hong Kong, from the colony of Hong Kong, in a public speech at the University of Hong Kong in 1923. Hong Kong had been a British colony following the Opium Wars, going through 3 iterations of British colonial rule since the mid-1800s. Then in 1898, China leased Hong Kong to the British for 99 years. It's only since 1998 that Hong Kong's colonial status became a sore spot for the CCP. Pre-1997 British handover, CCP China never denied Hong Kong's obvious status as a British colony. Hong Kong served as a lucrative international business hub for mainland communist China. Hong Kong expert Liao explains, quote, "What wasn't okay in mainland CCP-run China was typically fair game in the international economy of the neighboring Hong Kong colony. This gray area allowed CCP businesses to thrive in Hong Kong, serving CCP needs. Mainland Chinese CCP businesses benefited enormously from this loophole," unquote. For historians watching the manipulation of Hong Kong's colonial past, it's baffling to observe how CCP China wants it both ways. The CCP needs to continue to have the quote-unquote gray area economy of international Hong Kong. What's different now is that the CCP wants to essentially operate Hong Kong as its own colony complete with global business access, while implementing its machinery of totalitarian control. This is possible as long as Hong Kong is unable to seek independence and is held hostage by China. Going back to Sun Yat-sen, the father of modern China, before it became communist, it was Sun Yat-sen that mentioned the abolition of the unequal treaties in the Declaration of the First National Congress of the Chinese Kuomintang in 1924. Following World War II decolonization trends, the newly formed CCP China continued with Hong Kong as a British colony, though all other Japanese and European-occupied Asian territories were returned. This is notably due to Hong Kong's international business connections, benefiting the CCP. The CCP now alleges that Hong Kong's fall into British hands was due to 3 so-called unequal treaties. Jung clarifies the quote-unquote unequal treaties concept. He says, quote, "Let's be clear, the quote-unquote unequal treaties appeared 80 years after Hong Kong became a British colony. The precedent was set in the 1960s by the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties. It stipulates that a treaty facilitated by the threat or use of force needed to be renegotiated via peaceful negotiations. If negotiations failed, the treaty remained in force," unquote. Jung believes that the CCP and the Education Bureau's refusal to recognize treaties is violating the rule of law. He says, quote, "An unequal treaty is only a moral or subjective concept, not a legal concept. A treaty is a treaty," unquote. Jung believes students challenging the fake history will result in educational discourse immediately collapsing, evidence that both the CCP and the Education Bureau are lying. Jung says that it's a pity that education under the CCP rule is dishonest. Integrity and the principle of truth in education have been completely lost. Any educator would agree that it's hard to stomach. He says, quote, "It's invariably what happens under CCP rule," unquote. What surprised Jung was the brazen deployment of outright lies fabricated by CCP authorities to write fake history directly, as he says, turning the concocted narrative that Hong Kong is not a British colony into reality. It's an equivalent feat to saying that 2 + 2 is 4. He laments that Hong Kong's ideology is now lining up with the CCP's only 25 years after the CCP takeover of Hong Kong. In Hong Kong, Jung says education has fallen. He says, quote, "Students only learn lies, no truth, and there's no insight, no critical thinking. Hong Kongers are required to comply with regulations," unquote. When asked how to remedy the CCP contamination of Hong Kong's learning institutions, he says, quote, "They must be awakened and seek other knowledge, find good books to read. Parents should do their own research and share it with their children," unquote.